On paper, Dexter Morgan and Patrick Bateman seem pretty similar. Both predators, both hiding in plain sight, both living these elaborate double lives while everyone around them stays completely oblivious. But here's the thing, paper doesn't bleed. Once you actually dig beneath the surface, the gap between these two becomes absolutely massive. So if they were really standing face to face, who comes out on top? Let's break this down. Dexter Morgan was literally built for control. The moment Harry noticed those urges, Dexter started training. We're talking college martial arts class, chokehold practice, learning exactly how much pressure you need to keep someone down without making a sound. This stuff became muscle memory for him. When Dexter wraps his arm around someone's neck or slides that syringe into their carotid artery, it's surgical precision. And here's proof. Remember Sergeant Dokes? This guy was an Army Ranger with Special Force credentials. When Dokes lunged at Dexter with all that military aggression, what happened? Dexter countered with a rear naked choke so tight that Dokes had zero options. Years of discipline paying off right there. Then there's the Ray Speltzer fight. This hulking bodybuilder who literally designed mazes to trap his victims. Speltzer drew first blood, completely overpowered Dexter in round 1. Most people would have been done, but Dexter? He came back, studied Speltzer's rhythm, and systematically dismantled him until the big guy was on the floor. Even when chaos hit, Brian Moser coming at him with a knife, Arthur Mitchell catching him off guard, Dexter's reflexes held. He adapted, defended, and never froze up. Now Patrick Bateman? This guy never actually fought anyone. Everything he did was pure performance, designed for shock value, never survival. Think about Paul Allen's death. That was an ambush with an axe while Allen was drunk and distracted by Huey Lewis and the news. The famous chainsaw scene? Bateman just chasing a panicked sex worker through a hallway, swinging wildly until gravity does most of the work. When his environment worked for him, sure, Bateman could be dangerous. But the second things went sideways? Complete meltdown. That alley shootout tells you everything. Sirens started blaring, police closing in, and Bateman just unloads his gun in pure panic mode. He accidentally blows up a cop car, sprints through the city, and ends up in this surreal frenzy where nobody can tell what's real and what's in his head. His strength came from catching people off guard, never actual skill. The moment someone fought back, Bateman lost the script entirely. So what happens when these two actually meet? Dexter doesn't give Bateman time to set up his little theater. No music, no business cards, no drugs to dull anyone's reflexes. Dexter picks a controlled environment, and in that space, all of Bateman's dramatics mean absolutely nothing. He's restrained in seconds, either by chokehold or sedative, and whatever ego he thought made him powerful just evaporates. Dexter's body was trained to hunt and subdue. Bateman's body was trained to pose in front of mirrors. In any real combat situation, Bateman wouldn't survive the first grapple, but winning a fight is just one piece of the puzzle. To really survive long term, you need the brains to plan, adapt, and stay 3 steps ahead. Dexter's brilliance never needed a spotlight. His intelligence was completely practical, focused on skills that kept him breathing. He mastered forensics, became an expert in blood spatter analysis, and turned that knowledge into the perfect shield. At Miami Metro, detectives saw him as this reliable expert, never realizing his day job was basically the ideal cover for his night work. When Dexter walked into a scene, like that blood-drenched hotel and seeing red, his brain rewound the entire crime. Every impact, every arterial spray, it was like watching the murder play in reverse. Nobody else could reconstruct a killing in seconds like that, and his genius went beyond the lab. Dexter was fluent in digital misdirection, spoofing police servers, deleting evidence, planting trails that sent investigators in completely wrong directions. When LaGuerta reopened the Bay Harbor Butcher case, Dexter turned her own certainty against her. He left breadcrumbs that made her look biased, desperate, almost delusional. He didn't need to argue with her, he just rearranged the evidence until she lost all credibility with her colleagues. That combination of technical skill and long game manipulation kept Dexter invisible even while killing right under their noses. Patrick Bateman's intelligence? Pure facade. He memorized restaurant reservations, designer labels, skincare routines, pop music trivia. In boardrooms and nightclubs, that passed for sophistication. But none of it mattered when survival was actually on the line. When Detective Donna Kimball questioned him about Paul Allen disappearing, Bateman could barely string together coherent answers. He's stumbling, sweating, contradicting himself, just hoping that nobody cared enough to dig deeper. Pure panic disguised as confidence. This lack of depth showed everywhere. He left trophies and sketches scattered around his apartment like some kid showing off his artwork. He called his lawyer and confessed to dozens of murder on voicemail, then completely collapsed when the lawyer just dismissed it. Dexter would never gamble his safety on someone else's apathy. Bateman's world let him slide because his peers were too shallow to notice the cracks. So brain to brain was no contest. Dexter's mind was a weapon, fine-tuned for survival, processing crime scenes, erasing digital trails, outmaneuvering professional investigators. Bateman's mind was basically a mirror, reflecting status symbol back at people who weren't looking closely enough to see through them. In a real survival situation, one guy's thinking 3 moves ahead, while the other's reciting Whitney Houston lyrics. If you're enjoying this breakdown so far, hit that subscribe button. We got plenty more matchups like this coming your way. Dexter survived because his intelligence kept him invisible. Bateman survived because nobody bothered looking. If the world stopped being blind to what was right in front of them, only one of these guys would still be standing. But raw intelligence alone doesn't guarantee anything. What matters is how you use it consistently over years to actually outlast the hunt. Dexter was always thinking about his next kill, but more importantly, he thought about the life surrounding it. Everything he did was layered with structure. His job at Miami Metro gave him access to police chatter, case files, and evidence chains. This vantage point kept him 2 steps ahead of anyone who might sniff around. When Sergeant Dokes started tailing him in Season 2, Dexter let Dokes build his own case, then slowly flipped the entire script. Evidence disappeared, blood slides turned up in Dokes' boat, and suddenly the whole department believed their most aggressive cop was actually the Bay Harbor Butcher. That was years of planning for the inevitable moment someone got too close. Same thing with Captain LaGuerta. When she started piecing things together, Dexter showed the exact same patience. He let her keep digging, fed her selective information, and made her look biased in front of her colleagues. By the time everything ended in that shipping container, she was already completely isolated. The fallout didn't touch anyone except her. Dexter always made sure that the walls crumbled around his enemies before he made his final move. His exits were just as calculated. When the noose finally tightened after Deborah's death, he staged his own ending. The slice of light disappeared into that hurricane, and the world mourned him just as another storm casualty. In reality, he popped up in Oregon, logging by day, living quietly at night. Years later, he pulled the same trick in Iron Lakes as Jib Lindsay, nearly a decade under a new name without drawing any suspicion, even while dating the police chief. Patrick Bateman's idea of strategy? Laying newspaper on the floor to catch blood. His cleanup was pure improvisation. His alibis were paper thin, and his survival depended entirely on a world too self-absorbed to pay attention. He left bodies in apartments, blood trails in hallways, murder sketches lying around like trophies. When the guilt finally cracked him, he confessed everything to his lawyer's voicemail, hoping for some kind of release. Instead of an arrest, he got brushed off, his crimes dismissed as either a joke or a mistaken identity. If Bateman had lived in a world where people actually looked closer, he wouldn't have lasted a week. So in any survival scenario, there's no contest. Dexter's playing chess years in advance. Bateman stuck playing dress up. One built a life that let him keep killing in plain sight. The other barely held together a facade long enough for his next dinner reservation. But when you're a secret serial killer, staying alive comes down to controlling the people around you. Dexter's deadliest weapon was never the knife or syringe. It was the mask. He designed an identity so harmless that even people actively hunting serial killers invited him to family barbecues. That awkward smile, showing up with donuts in the break room, the slightly off but completely dependable demeanor, none of this was accidental. This was a character he rehearsed every single day until even he could believe it. That mask gave him the freedom to stalk victims, slip out late at night, and walk through crime scenes he created without anyone suspecting a thing. When suspicion did creep in, Dexter turned into pure manipulation. Rita questioned his late nights, so he gave her a whole new narrative. He was a recovering heroin addict. He actually attended meetings, built routines around it, gave emotional confessions, and she believed every word. And that belief bought him all the time he needed. When Lila entered his life, Dexter let her think that they were the same, 2 broken people drawn together by darkness. He encouraged that illusion just long enough to use her, then staged a final meeting in Paris and made sure she never came back. With Miguel Prado, he dangled trust, let Miguel think that he was learning the code, then stripped it all away when Miguel crossed the line. Every single time, Dexter was controlling the exact story his targets wanted to hear. Only Dokes ever saw through it. He knew that awkward smile was complete bullshit, and he tailed Dexter relentlessly. But even then, Dexter manipulated the environment around them, and by the time Lila lit that cabin on fire, Miami Metro was ready to close the Bay Harbor Butcher case on Dokes instead. Patrick Bateman's manipulation was shallow by comparison. He intimidated women with wealth and charm and impressed peers with business cards and dinner reservations, but cracked the second any real pressure entered the room. He was basically begging to be believed. His peers didn't trust him. They just didn't care enough to notice the lies. When he confessed those murders to his lawyer, it should have been game over. Instead, his lawyer dismissed it as a joke. Bateman's survival depended on indifference, never design. If these two ever crossed paths, Dexter would read Bateman's ego like an open book and play it like an instrument. Bateman, desperate to be acknowledged, would spill everything: brands, restaurants, names, maybe even confessions, while Dexter quietly gathered every thread he needed. The guy who manipulated entire homicide departments wouldn't struggle with a narcissistic Wall Street yuppie. Dexter lied to survive. Bateman lied to be seen. In any face-to-face situation, only one of those approaches holds up when the pressure really mounts. But manipulation is just part of the equation. The real question is, what actually drives these men to kill in the first place? Dexter never pretended he wasn't a monster. He knew exactly what he was from day one, a guy with violent urges who couldn't survive without acting on them. What separated him from complete chaos was Harry's code: kill only the guilty, confirm the evidence, never get caught. Those rules gave him structure, and for years they allowed him to function in the world. His first kill followed the process perfectly: stalking, confirming guilt, extracting a confession, then striking. Every ritual afterward reinforced that system. But Dexter was far from perfect. When he killed Jonathan Farrow, an innocent photographer, he realized too late that he'd broken the code. That mistake cut right into his identity. The code was about control, and breaking it made him unstable. Even in New Blood, when he killed Officer Logan, that recognition stopped him from running afterward. Logan was innocent, the code was broken, and when Harrison raised that gun, Dexter accepted it because there was no way back once that line got crossed. Patrick Bateman had no lines whatsoever. His killings were completely impulsive, driven by ego, insecurity, and boredom. He stabbed homeless people in the streets because they annoyed him. He murdered Paul Allen because he felt overshadowed by a better business card. He chased sex workers with a chainsaw because he got off on the spectacle. No system, no rules, he just killed anyone who became an outlet for his rage or a prop for his fantasies. His violence was pure indulgence. That distinction actually matters. Dexter's corruption was cold, but it was predictable. He rationalized kills through the code, and when he broke it, he crumbled. Bateman never rationalized anything. He didn't need to. In his world, rules didn't exist. Nobody held him accountable, and he never felt the need to justify his crimes to himself. That's why his confession felt so hollow. He was weighed down by the fact that nobody took him seriously. In any direct matchup, that difference defines everything. Dexter operates within a framework that keeps him sharp, consistent, and careful. Bateman just spirals with no anchor. One guy kills to contain his darkness, the other kills to feed it. When order collides with chaos, order wins. But moral codes only tell half the story. What really decides survival is how each guy performs when the walls start closing in. Dexter thrived under pressure. His entire life depended on staying calm when situations got too close for comfort. When Dokes caught him, Dexter packed up his tools, shifted his tone, and walked out of that scene like it was just a misunderstanding. Later, when Dokes discovered the blood slide collection, Dexter mapped out his options and built a plan that ended with Dokes isolated in that cabin while the rest of Miami Metro turned their suspicion towards him instead. These were reflexes hardened by years of thinking 2 moves ahead while surrounded by cops. Even in the most personal moments, his composure never slipped. When Rita nearly walked in on a kill in progress, Dexter turned instantly, smiled, and shifted into boyfriend mode without missing a beat. The victim, already strapped down, stayed hidden in the next room, while Dexter carried on a perfectly normal conversation. Rita left none the wiser. That same composure carried him through LaGuerta's reopened investigation. She had motive, a timeline, and pieces of evidence pointing right at him. Dexter dismantled her case methodically, step by step, until she was the one isolated and vulnerable. Patrick Bateman cracked the second things spun out of control. In that alleyway shootout, sirens triggered a complete spiral. When his mask slipped in conversations with colleagues, he'd babble incoherently about music or brands just to fill the silence. With Detective Kimball, the only thing that saved him was Kimball's complete indifference. The one time Bateman tried to take ownership of his crimes, he broke down into hysteria. He was always on the verge of collapse. In any direct face-off with Dexter, that difference is fatal. Dexter keeps his breathing steady, his words controlled, and his moves precise. Even with cops breathing down his neck, Bateman loses his composure at the sound of a siren. Put them in the same room, and the outcome's predictable. Dexter stays in control, Bateman spirals into incoherence, and the pressure crushes him long before any blade comes out. Survival under pressure defines killers who last, and Dexter has it completely locked down. Bateman never even came close. But the real measure of survival is what happens when someone has to vanish completely and build a new life from scratch. and make sure you subscribe with notifications on because the next matchup goes even deeper into killers who could actually stand a chance. Disappearing is more than just running. You have to create a version of yourself so ordinary that nobody thinks to look twice. Dexter perfected that art. When the net finally closed after Deborah's death, he staged his own ending and hers. The slice of life sailed into that hurricane, and Miami Metro mourned him as another storm casualty. To the world, Dexter Morgan died at sea. In reality, he was in Oregon, logging by day, living alone at night, and staying completely invisible. And life wasn't glamorous, but it was survival in its purest form. Years later, he did it again in New Blood. As Jim Lindsay in Iron Lake, he held a steady job at the bait shop, lived quietly in his cabin, and even built a relationship with Angela Bishop, the local police chief. That's more than hiding, that's complete integration. For nearly a decade, Dexter lived under his new name without slipping once. He built a new life, convincing enough to fool the one person most likely to see through him. His ability to reinvent himself was always about controlling how the world perceived him. Patrick Bateman never escaped anything. He stayed in the same world, playing the same part, clinging to the same business cards and reservations. When his crimes piled up, his idea of a reset was that voicemail confession to a lawyer. Instead of starting fresh, he begged to be caught. And when the lawyer brushed it off as a joke, Bateman melted further into delusion. He couldn't imagine a life without the applause of his shallow peers, which meant that he could never step away from it. Reinvention requires discipline, and Bateman's survival was based entirely on apathy from people around him. The second the world decided to look closer, he would have nowhere left to run. If these two were ever side by side, Dexter would erase Bateman from existence without anyone noticing. And if Dexter needed to vanish afterward, he already had a system ready to go. Bateman would be trying to book a table at Dorsia while covered in blood. If you like seeing these head-to-head breakdowns, subscribe and join the discussion. Half the fun is hearing who you think would win. So when it comes to disappearing and starting over, Dexter proved that you could vanish repeatedly and still come back under a new name. Bateman couldn't even step outside his own reflection. But survival also comes down to how you treat people closest to you, and how far you're willing to go when those relationships get tested. Dexter lived his double life by carefully compartmentalizing the people he loved. Deborah, Rita, Harrison. He convinced himself that he could protect them while feeding his dark passenger. To pull that off, he engineered a persona that made everyone around him feel safe. Batista saw him as family. Masuka thought he was harmless. Rita believed that she found this steady, gentle guy who could provide for her kids. None of that was real. It was camouflage, practiced to perfection. But that camouflage had limits. When people in his circle got too close, Dexter made brutal choices. With Rita, he lied constantly. With Lila, he manipulated her completely. And when Deborah discovered the truth, Dexter didn't end her life, but his secret consumed hers until the day she died. Even with Harrison, his last act of protection was letting his son pull that trigger, knowing that it would free him from the cycle. Dexter's ruthlessness came from the cold calculation that anyone, even loved ones, could be sacrificed to keep his mask intact. Patrick Bateman's treatment of people was way less complicated. He didn't protect anyone because he didn't need a mask to keep family close. There was no family to begin with. His relationships were shallow, transactional, completely disposable. Evelyn, his fiancée, was just convenient. Courtney was another box to check on his social calendar. Colleagues were rivals, props or targets. Friends were background noise. Lovers were toys. Everyone in his orbit was replaceable. That difference matters. Dexter's ruthlessness was precise. He lied to maintain bonds and protect appearances, even if it meant warping the lives of people closest to him. Bateman never maintained anything. His selfishness burned every connection by default. He was reckless with friends, cruel to women, dismissive of peers. There's no strategy in it, just emptiness. So in any face-to-face scenario, the contrast is clear. Dexter weaponized his relationships as shields to hide behind, keeping his circle intact as long as possible. Bateman destroyed his through pure carelessness, leaving him exposed and alone. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Not just how they treat individuals, but how they present themselves to the entire world. Because ultimately, that's what decides who stays invisible and who gets exposed. Dexter's disguise was a complete way of life. He lived behind it every hour of every day. At Miami Metro, he was just the quiet blood spatter guy. Harry had drilled into him that the only way to survive was looking boring, unthreatening, ordinary. Dexter practiced until that act became second nature. It worked so well that seasoned detectives, people trained to sniff out liars, never once thought to question him. When cracks did appear, Dexter doubled down on the act. Dokes accused him of being the Bay Harbor Butcher, but the department dismissed it as personal bias because Dexter looked too harmless. LaGuerta started piecing things together, but her colleagues wrote her off as paranoid because Dexter's mask was so consistent. Even when he stood over bodies he cut up himself, he could walk into that same crime scene with a clipboard and narrate the details like he hadn't been there the night before. That level of compartmentalization even fooled him sometimes. Patrick Bateman's public persona was different. He was hiding behind excess. His mask was the designer suit, the expensive haircut, the obsession with restaurants and music trivia. It impressed his shallow circle of peers, but it was fragile. He didn't know how to improvise when pressed. When colleagues confused him for someone else, he didn't correct them. He survived because nobody cared to look deeper, never because he crafted a mask that could withstand scrutiny. This is the divide between them. Dexter made invisibility his identity. Every action, every smile, every donut was part of a long-term deception that kept him safe for decades. Bateman relied on apathy of others. If his world wasn't so shallow, he would have been exposed immediately. So in any direct matchup, Dexter's public face holds strong under the eyes of detectives and family. Bateman's cracks the second that someone really listens. One built a persona as armor, the other wore it like his costume, flimsy and fake. But deception only takes you so far. Eventually, every mask falls away, and what's left is how these guys collapse when their lives finally catch up to them. Dexter's end was all about being caught by the people who mattered most. For years, his mask held perfectly. Colleagues trusted him, suspects underestimated him, and even Deborah, a seasoned detective, stayed blind until she saw him with Travis Marshall on that table. That moment cracked everything. When Deborah got shot and was left in a vegetative state, Dexter faced something that he couldn't plan his way out of. He pulled her off life support himself, not out of strategy, but grief. For the first time, he killed without ritual, without the code, and it broke him. The collapse came from emotion. In New Blood, when Dexter killed Officer Logan, an innocent man with no criminal record, he crossed the one line Harry's code was built to prevent. That violation ended the structure that had kept him in control his entire life. Harrison saw it immediately, and Dexter didn't fight when that gun was raised. His last act was acceptance. His downfall came because he understood the code no longer protected him, and without it, there was no reason to keep going. Patrick Bateman's downfall is harder to define because it will never actually arrive. He doesn't get caught, doesn't face trial, doesn't accept responsibility. He's trapped in this cycle where nobody takes him seriously, not even as a killer. Whether his murders happen or not almost don't matter. What matters is that Bateman never escapes the emptiness. His craving for validation becomes a cage that he can't break out of. That's the key difference. Dexter fell because the truth finally caught up with him and he chose to end it. Bateman just kept existing, hollow and forgotten in a world that refused to care. One guy's ending was definitive, shaped by moral collapse and family reckoning. The other was an endless loop of ego and denial. So if these two were to ever face to face, the outcome wouldn't be close. Dexter lived and died by discipline, control, and structure. Bateman drowned in delusion. In a matchup where survival, precision, and composure decide the winner, there's no real contest. One was a predator with precision, the other was a narcissist lost in his own fantasies. You've seen every angle, now it's your turn. Who do you think really wins when Dexter Morgan and Patrick Bateman go head to head? Drop your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe with notifications on, and I'll see you in the next one.